So ImageLine just dropped FL Studio 20.8, and with that update came some new linear phase options inside of a few of their plugins, one of them being Frequency Splitter. And because of this, I definitely want to redo my sidechain tutorials. Reason being, now that we have these linear phase filters, the sidechain ability inside of FL Studio has dramatically improved. If you don't understand what sidechaining is, in this example, we're actually going to use sidechaining to duck the volume of our bass whenever our kick hits. That way our kick will punch through the mix a little bit harder and will actually save a little bit of headroom. That's actually the main reason why I do sidechaining, not to necessarily make the kick sound any different than what it does. If I was really worried about the sound of the kick, I would actually just adjust the phase and I wouldn't worry about sidechaining at all. But because I'm trying to make my tracks as loud as possible, sidechaining is definitely a way that will get some extra volume out of your tracks. So here I have Frequency Splitter loaded up on my synth subtrack, but one of the special features of the Frequency Splitter inside of FL Studio are the sends. Okay, I had to pause the tutorial for a second because I actually made a little mistake, but because I made that mistake, hopefully this will help you to not run into that same mistake. So if you go into your bass track and you're trying to split your frequencies, I was thinking that whatever you keep set to the main track, it would actually just be that section. So I thought I could keep just the sub on the main track and then send the high end to another track. But what ends up happening, the main track will always play everything that was coming through originally. So in order to really split this up, you're going to have to send this into two separate tracks, which is exactly what I did. So I have my bass going into track 33 right now, and we're splitting the sub into track 16 and the top end of the bass into track 17. And again, you do that by right-clicking and select sidechain to this track. I'm just going to do that for both tracks here. So now that our main bass track is routed to two separate tracks, now we have to send the signal from Frequency Splitter. So I'm going to right click here for our sub, select Synth Sub, which is the name of track 16, and I named track 17 Synth Bass. And again, because you get the full signal playing through the main track, I'm actually going to turn this track off. And now this is what we get. So if I turn this back on, the sound will double. Versus. So make sure you're not doubling up your track there. So now on the sub track, I've added my sidechain, which I'm using Fruity Limiter for. In my previous sidechain tutorials, which I'll link below, I'm using Fruity Peak Controller. Definitely check out that tutorial as well, because it's definitely an alternative method if you don't necessarily want to use Frequency Splitter. So here in Fruity Limiter, I have the limiter ceiling turned all the way up so we're not affecting it, and the attack turned all the way down. Why? I don't know. That's just something that I read in the manual to do. And then in the compression settings, I have under the sidechain, right click here, and I chose the kick, because I want my kick drum to affect my synth bass. Like I said at the beginning, every time the kick hits, I want my synth bass to drop down in volume, specifically the sub, which is why we split that with the Frequency Splitter. And again, to get the kick to show up in the sidechain here, you actually have to route that. So I have my kick on track 18. I'm going to turn that on. And I've already sidechained this to all of my bass tracks here, and that's how you get the option to show up here in the compressor. So now that that's there, let's go ahead and play this without the sidechain turned on and listen to what it sounds like, and then also pay attention to the meter here on my mix bus. So we're peaking right around -3 without the sidechain. Let's go ahead and turn the sidechain on. So now the bass is going to duck down in volume every time the kick hits, and the kick should be a little bit more pronounced, but more than anything, we're going to get a little bit more headroom on our mix bus. So we're saving almost 3 dB there. So our peaks were averaging around -6. We did get a few peaks that were hitting above -6, but for the most part, we are definitely shaving off a couple dB of headroom there. And that's a big deal, especially when you talk about the low end, which takes up most of the headroom in your track. I'm going to set all of these settings back to the default so that you can see how I usually adjust this. So let's go ahead and play this, and I'm not going to have any sidechain compression going on. You can hear that the kick and the bass are definitely fighting each other there. So let's go ahead and bring down the threshold, and we're going to look at the bass level here, and we're going to start bringing the threshold down to right where we actually start hitting the main top part of the bass here. And then we're going to start out with a ratio of 2:1. So you can see that we're barely getting any compression there. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down this threshold. You could definitely hear that kick popping out a lot more as I bring this threshold down. And you could hear that that's way too much, mainly because of the release. So now we're going to adjust the release here. We're going to leave the threshold all the way down and adjust the release to where it sounds correct in terms of the timing when the sound comes back in. The reason we leave the threshold all the way down, it's really easy to hear the attack and release settings when you have that threshold all the way down. Now you could start seeing artifacts and hearing artifacts. So we're going to clean that up, but I really like the timing that we got on the release here. So we're going to use the sustain to clean that up. So we're going to increase the sustain until all of this kind of disappears. Boom, that definitely cleaned it up. You can see how this is really messy right there, and then that's pretty much just a clean line right here. This is a thick, dirty line. Clean, thin line. And that's what we're looking for, because when you see this line, you're probably also hearing a little too much compression or distortion really going on. Not the kind of distortion that you want either. Now, this is where someone like Kenny Beats would say, sidechain compression sounds horrible, never do it. Well, we're not done with our settings here, but this is usually what people think of when they talk about sidechain compression. They usually hear this sound, the pumping sound. And in hip hop, you definitely don't want that. So how do we fix that? All you got to do is just turn up the threshold, guys, and you'll fix it. And there you go. You got a really clean hitting kick, and you saved a little bit of headroom, and you can adjust the settings from here. I would definitely leave the attack and the release and the sustain settings as is, as we found it. You're always going to want this attack all the way down because you want that compression to hit right away. But in terms of character and flavor, that's where the ratio and the threshold is going to come in. You could pretty much leave the knee right where it's at, but let's play around with the ratio and see if we can come up with something even better. I think that's perfect. Again, in the context of a full mix, you're going to get a much better idea and really going to have a much easier time dialing in these settings, because it'll be really obvious what settings you really want to really make that kick pop out in the mix. And you'll definitely notice that your overall headroom is going to be conserved as well. Now, some of you might be wondering, how come I'm not using Fruity Peak Controller anymore? And that's because if you're trying to use the linear phase option with the frequency splitter, you're going to notice a huge delay with Fruity Peak Controller. I don't know if that will ever be updated. Probably not. And that's just the nature of linear phase. It introduces a lot of extra latency. So in order for that to catch up, it's probably not. It's probably not going to catch up. In those cases, though, definitely test out the difference between using Fruity Peak Controller and, say, Parametric EQ2 without the linear phase option. You might be surprised that by doing that, you actually might get a sound that you're looking for, or a sound that you might prefer over what we did here with the linear phase option inside a frequency splitter. And also, it might use, it's probably going to use less CPU. So again, I'll link that tutorial down below. Feel free to comment if you have any questions and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.